Vehicles Bill is hereby called to order. For the record, I would like to acknowledge the presence of my dear colleague, Senator Francis Tol Tolentino. Sir, good morning, sir. And we have members, our colleagues also in the House of Representatives. We have Congressman Paul Daza, our dear friend. And we also invited some other congressmen. Maybe they'll join us little later on. I invited also Wes Gatchalian to join us. These are the authors of principal authors in the House of Representatives. May I request, and I'd like to thank all the resource persons for attending today's hearing. And we'd like to ask the committee secretary, Ma'am Maan, to acknowledge the resource persons in today's hearing.
Uh, yes, Your Honor. The committee recognizes the presence of the following resource persons from the Land Transportation Office, Assistant Secretary Edgar Galvante, together with his Chief Planning Section, Mr. Danilo Incela. From the Land Transportation Office as well, Regional Director, Mr. Clarence Ginto. From the Department of Trade and Industry, John Stephen Magboo, Senior Trade Industry Development Specialist, Bureau of Philippine Standards. John Kenneth Priol, Trade and Industry Development Specialist, Bureau of Philippine Standards. Emery Cabarles, BPS Trade and Industry Development Specialist, also from the Bureau of Philippine Standards. Director Maria Giza Lim, from the Bureau of Import Services. Assistant Director Raymond L. Cahayon, Bureau of Import Services. Assistant Director Gino Ilano, DTI Export Marketing Bureau. Miss Alisa Malabanan from the DTI Export Marketing Bureau. And Mr. Elvin Garcia, Supervising Investment Specialist from the Bureau of Investments. From the Department of Budget and Management, Mr. Mark James Evangelista. From the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Mr. Alvin R. Alcid. From the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, Ms. Maria Linda A. Andrade, Chief TESDA Specialist, Planning Office, and Ms. Beverly B. Bayonisto, TESDA Specialist 1, Planning Office. From the Bureau of Customs, we have Attorney Karen Anyambao. And from the Coalition of Clean Air Advocates of the Philippines, Mr. Alexander Loinas. From the Automotive Association of the Philippines, we have Mr. Augustus Ferreria. From the Manila Sports Car Club, Attorney Andres Santamaria. From Top Gear Philippines, we have Mr. Dean Sotabamo. That's all, Your Honor.
Thank you very much to our ComSec. And again, welcome to everybody attending today. Maraming salamat. This may not be a very wide-ranging measure, but nevertheless, it's important for enthusiasts like myself, who is also a classic car owner, together with Senator Toll and many of our colleagues that are here today, and to many of the collectors that are um, uh, having problems down the line. So allow me to make an opening statement, ladies and gentlemen. Again, pleasant good morning to all. Thank you for attending today's meeting. The Subcommittee on Vintage Vehicles Bills under Committee of Public Services has called this public hearing to consider Senate Bill number 2396, authored by Senator Win Gatchalian, and SB number 2402, authored by this representation, and House Bill number 9884 and Vintage Vehicle Regulation Act. Vintage vehicles or cars, also known as classic cars, mirror the times and technology of the period that they are produced. Hence, they give a glimpse of the technological, historical, and cultural significance of this mode of transport. Their usage now goes beyond the transport of goods and people. Many period movies, advertisements, prenuptial pictorials, weddings, special occasions use vintage vehicles to portray a lost era or depict a classic look on those events. To many, they are an admiration to look at. For me, I can only see beauty and elegance when I see one. And not to mention that owners, collectors, and enthusiasts of this type of vehicles feel a sense of fulfillment and pride when they pass it on to the heirs and new owners. Before the onset of the pandemic, there was a thriving scene for vintage vehicles in the country. These were during car shows, exhibits, motorcades, among them organized by the Manila International Auto Show and other car clubs. However, not all about vintage vehicles are classy and glossy stories. Vintage could also mean old and unkept. Unkept not only in its physical appearance, but more so its regular registration with the Land Transportation Office. Proper safekeep of the registration and ownership papers and rules governing its use on the roads, registration, and even change of ownership. Suffice it is to say that the vintage vehicles have very significant differences with regular motor vehicles that can ply on the road on a daily or regular basis. They have very distinct nature and it's a class of their own. It is against this backdrop that we are proposing this measure to give the type of vehicles their due recognition for their contribution in our history, culture, and technological development in land transportation. This bill primarily aims to set proper regulations in the importation, registration, ownership, restoration, and road usage of vintage vehicles, among others. And I do hope that we'll have a fruitful discussion on the bills under consideration. And I do hope that we have a robust vintage vehicle sector in the country, continue to pass on the knowledge, enjoyment, and appreciation of vintage vehicles to future generations. And on a personal note, I've been restoring cars since my congressional days, even earlier than I was even a congressman. When I first brought in a Porsche 365 in about 30 years ago, a 1956 Porsche 365, which I do not know why. 10 years thereafter, because I didn't know how to restore it, I sold, and now I extremely regret selling. But and I've had the chance of restoring Ford Mustang. So I basically have a little knowledge on the problems faced by vintage car owners, particularly on the issue of registration. And that's why I'm very happy that the LTO is here. If we can find a way, truly, to be able to register these cars, we have to understand that sometimes these are barn finds. You know, you find them in somebody's garage, 40 years old, 50 years old. You haven't run at all. They're no longer registered. But it opens up a Pandora's box when you buy it from that person, restore it, and you're going to try to run it. We will incur a lot of problems with the highway patrol group, of course, with the LTO and the registration. So that has been my experience. As a matter of fact, I've had this experience where in my restored car, it was a Mustang, it was being restored in Clark, and they took it around for a test drive, and it was apprehended by the highway patrol group because they didn't have a registration. Obviously, it was restored. So in-impound yung kotse. So uh, my I was completely aghast because we just had it fully restored and they had to tow it and thankfully nothing happened to the vehicle until we can explain. I had to call the head of the HPG and explain to him that it's a restored car. We had to call the restorer to of course give an affidavit that it was a restored 50-year-old car. It was a 67 Mustang. So stories like that happen all the time to sports, vintage car owners. And it really is a nightmare for many of us. And we just want to pursue the passion. We're not doing anything illegal. Definitely, these are not carnap cars. And so we want to come up with a mode of, or a system rather, that we can actually register these vehicles. And I still have restored vehicles that I can't use. Alam po ni Yusek Galvante to because every time I see him, that's what I always talk about whenever there's a budget hearing in the Senate. I always go approach him and I say, Yusek, yung aking kotse, di pa nare-register. I can't take it out of the garage or the village. I can drive it around the village to be able to just run all the parts and function properly. But as soon as I step out of the village without a registration, definitely mahuhuli po tayo. So napakahirap and that is the reason why we needed to call for this hearing so that we can have a nice system in place for vintage car owners. I know there are problems. I know we have limitations. For example, on the Clean Air Act, emission controls. We have also safety on the issue on seat belts. We have a seat belt law, etc., etc. So we have to comply with this. But this law will give us a bit of leeway for vintage car owners. What we try to avoid also, and I agree with some of the members of the LTO as well as other concerned agencies, is the proliferation of older cars that are not considered vintage or classic. You know, you'll have the person who will have his Ford Laser or his Toyota Corolla that is 40 years old but still running, but it's not really considered. I don't know. Depends on which sector you're talking to. No, because there's a Japanese vintage car collector. But what we don't want to happen is that people will circumvent the road and they'll be using cars that are not roadworthy. We also don't want that to happen because it's the safety of everybody concerned. So, yan lang po, and maybe I'll allow, of course, my dear colleagues to weigh in on the matter. I know for a fact Senator Francis Tolentino is a fellow vintage car enthusiast. He's been restoring cars for quite some time as well, and he's hopefully going to put up a museum in Tagaytay City on his vintage cars. May we recognize our distinguished colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to associate myself with the opening statement of Senator Zubiri. I am here to provide you with the necessary quorum. I won't take much of your time. I will probably just browse over the transcript of this hearing and probably propose some amendments in due time, probably next week, if we can still find time to pass this on third reading, Mr. Chairman. I am here to give full support to the measure. These are, for me, mute witnesses to Philippine history, the Studebakers, the Pontiacs, the Impalas, the De Sotos. They are all parts of our history. Right now, as I speak, Mr. Chairman, some of my political leaders are doing house to house in a municipality in Zamboanga del Sur, looking for a 1967 Impala. They thought I was running for election. No, just look for that Impala, which is a four-door Impala without a post in between, just the glasses. So I join you in your opening statement, and I look forward to our plenary deliberations for this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, my dear colleague. And yes, that's the excitement of the find, right? That's the bar find. When you go around barn find, and you go around looking for these vehicles, and watching a movie over a couple of weekends ago. Um, if you've watched No Time to Die of James Bond, you will see two beautiful Aston Martins there, fully restored. When I saw that, I'm like, that made the film. The film was over and done with for me. That was a beautiful film. And there were two different periods of his Aston Martin. So, like all of us here that are enthusiasts, we understand how we get excited over these things. And so, may we also recognize our dear colleague from the House, my good friend, Congressman Paul Dasa, to give a few remarks.
Thank you, Majority Leaders, Senator Subiri. Thank you also to Senator Tolentino for your presence in this hearing of the bill. I think both of you had already captured a lot of what needs to be said, but allow me, Senator, to mention also part of the motivation in drafting this bill and pushing it in Congress is, as many of us enthusiasts know, many of our nice cars have either not maintained because they were very hard to register anyways with the LTO. It just sits there. You're afraid to bring it out. Many were also lost, exported out to Japan and many other countries. As some of you may know, the Philippines has a rich culture and history of vehicles. In fact, we were the first, if not one of the first countries at the turn of the century in the early 1900s that started bringing in vehicles from the U.S. So we have that rich history of cars, and I think this bill will go a long way in helping the country protect, maintain, restore these vehicles. Secondly, I'd like to mention that we had the similar comments at the House level on the proliferation of older cars that 30, 40-year-old cars. We, I think, addressed that in this bill because the crux of this bill is basically you have an option if you have a car now that's, let's say, 40-year-old Toyota Corolla. Nothing prohibits you from registering it with the LTO. But if you opt to register it as a vintage car under this bill, the safety and emission requirements that were not present when your car was manufactured will not be required. But the exchange or basically what we asked the car associations and enthusiasts is, are you okay if you go through this registration, this privilege of registering as a vintage car, you can only use it weekends or holidays. So I think it will be misplaced to say that there will be a proliferation of cars because if they're here already, they're already being used. And if you're thinking of importing or bringing it in, no one will import a collectible classic car that you can only use weekends. So the bill, there's a provision here that if you bring in a 30-year-old car or older, you have no option but to register it as a vintage car, which means you can only use it weekends. And also, I'd like to highlight to everyone here, part of the motivation here is because we want to encourage and develop, the small sector in the auto industry. There are many shops that restore and repair. So we wanted to encourage this sector of the auto industry to be developed, and I think it could be a very good niche market for the Philippines. In the UK alone, the industry is £5 billion. I'm sure it's equally the same in the United States, and this is something I think with the many skilled workers that we have and enthusiasts here, there's no reason why we won't be able to compete globally in terms of maintaining and restoring vehicles. And this bill will go a long way in helping this industry. So thank you very much, Senator, for giving me the opportunity.
Corporation.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much, my dear friend Kong Paul. I remember, if you can recall, we actually had a good export industry on that. Is it classic cars? The one in Clark Classic Cars. They would restore cars in Clark and sell it in Australia, sell it in different countries nearby. I believe the owners were Australians, and
Yeah.
they had that industry going. And you're absolutely correct. Ang daming talyer, no, from Quezon City to Makati that are trying to restore also these classic cars. So let's start the ball rolling by, if we have no more colleagues from the House who would like to weigh in. Wala pa si Congressman Pineda. So maybe we can start by recognizing the government agencies, and then we'll continue to the resource persons one by one. We'll ask everyone to weigh in on the issue and comment on the bill. So may we recognize first and foremost the country's Land Transportation Office head, ASEC Edgar Galvante. ASEC, you're recognized, sir. Good morning. Thank you for attending.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator Tolentino, and from Congressman Paul Daza. Good morning. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to attend and witness this deliberation. Generally, Mr. Chairman, the Land Transportation has no objection on the passage of these two very important bills. It will clarify now the status of long-awaited treatment of the cars as described. And indeed, this is a very, very welcome gesture for the LKO because it will somehow clear up the confusion, so to speak. And again, as enumerated in the bill, uh, we have no objection or much objection on this, except probably we can reconsider just limiting the tag of being a vintage car for those 30 years old, at least 30 years old. Because, Mr. Chairman, for the information of the attendees, right now there are substantial numbers of vehicles which are being used daily, no, and registered. Kung ililimit natin, Mr. Chairman, na sa 30 years old lang at saka to be used only on Sundays, holidays, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, baka naman ma-display sila yung umaasa na gamitin lang sa sasakyan na pang araw-araw kung ito naman pasado sa roadworthiness check. So, we are suggesting, Mr. Chairman, na kung pwede siguro kung gawin natin mas older pa, ika nga. Not limited to 30 years, but rather older than 30 years, Mr. Chairman. Initially, yun po ang aming comment, suggestion, and we have forwarded this comment to the committee, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you, Asek. Yes, and due to our constant discussions, whenever I see you, there's a lack of guidelines talaga, and the law would be able to clarify this, particularly on registration. Kasi yung isang hinihingi po ninyo sa akin na deed of sale, that's only applicable if you actually buy the car from a second party or another party. But if we usually have old barn finds, yun yung mga nahanap mo sa kung saan na sulok-sulok po. Minsan wala nang deed of sale yan kasi that basically you rescue the car. So in this law, I think we just have to come up with an affidavit. I believe there's a way of doing it, no, particularly for the older cars. But I do agree, and I already discussed this with the principal author in the House, Congressman Paul, that we need to increase the age. I think 30 years is 30 years, 10 years ago was fine, but 30 years now I think is still too young for a vehicle to be called vintage. So I believe Congressman Paul would like to comment also. Com?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I wanted to address the concern of the good asset. There's just to clarify. There's a little bit of confusion here. For let's say cars that are 40 years old or 35 years old, or for that matter, any car 50 years old, they're not required. It's to register the car as a vintage car. So they just go through the regular annual registration, ASEC, and Chairman. So we won't be displacing anyone. But if you think you have a vintage car, a classic car, and you're willing to only use it weekends and holidays, then you can option to register it as a vintage vehicle, and the privileges will kick in, the safety, the emissions, and all of that. You get a vintage car plate, so you're very easily identified with the year of the car and also part of the pride of ownership. But you can only use it weekends and holidays, so it's not mandatory. I wanted to share to everyone present in this meeting. It will be at the option of the owner of the vehicle. So we consider that, Chairman, Senator Miggs, that no one will be displaced. People who are using older cars, they can just keep on using them and register them the way they're doing now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think what ASEC Galvante is also trying to convey is if we make it a bit older, for example, the cars if we lengthen the time, instead of 30 years, we make it, for example, 40 years. That will technically be 1982. So vehicles below 1982 could be registered as vintage vehicles. You have the 79s, the 1980s, the vehicle. And uh, actually, personally, Kong Paul, I'm not too keen on the issue on uh, the provision where we can only use it on weekends and the holidays, because it will limit a lot of the vintage car owners from actually taking it out for example, if I want to go to the Senate with my Mustang, I should be able to take my Mustang to the Senate if I wanted to drive it on a Wednesday. And for people who would like to take it on other days, parang if we put it in the law, technically illegal yan if we take it out on a weekday, and we can get caught. And I think that is baka backfire sa atin yan, the authors of the law, because obviously right now the vintage car owners can take it out anytime they want. So we're going to limit it to just 2 days of a week and holidays. So we are proposing under the committee report in keeping it more lenient when it comes to bringing it out of your garage. But of course, increasing the age so that really it will be limited to a number of certain vehicles that we can consider as vintage and classic. And I'll ask our other uh, uh, resource persons on what they feel about this, because the issue really is um, uh, registration. I think if we can look at the totality of the bill, okay, it's registration, how to register your vintage vehicles, usage, and roadworthiness. When I say usage, roadworthiness, it has to it cannot comply obviously with the clean air standards and other laws that we passed previously. It will give a sort of uh, a leeway, when it comes to these laws. So we can focus on these areas, no? Definitely, these are the most important areas and age of the vehicle that we will be registering. So we'll go to the next resource person. So okay na po ang LTO. Asik, you speak for the LTO now, so I won't call your RD anymore, Mr. Ginto, because he's
Good
around.
morning, Chairman.
Maybe
Good
we
morning,
can.
Congressman
Good
Paul.
morning, sir. Good morning. Yeah, good morning, RD.
No, Kong Eric.
Hi, Kong Eric, how are you? You want to
How
give
are
an
you?
opening statement, partner?
I'm glad your hair is black already.
I know I was following you, but
No, I'm
my wife
like
insisted that I dye my hair, so I had no choice. Partner, Congressman Pineda, at any time you want to give an opening statement, just let me know.
uh, uh, I'm sorry, but I'm not really high tech. So I had my son set up the WebEx. Took me a while to have it set up, but this bill is something that is being awaited by a lot of car enthusiasts, mostly the vintage car enthusiasts. And I think some of it will have been explained to you by Congressman Paul Daza, that we have problems and limitations in terms of bringing in used cars, for that matter. The only avenue that you can exercise now is through the Balikbayan program, which somehow is also being abused. So it is best that we just come up with our own bill to that effect for the importation of vintage and classic cars. That the problem, Chairman, uh, since the 1980s and 70s, I mean, a lot of our heritage cars, beautiful old cars that were brought in here during the American time, and then the Commonwealth period. At marami po dito, Chairman, have already been exported out. So I think this is one of the things that I really am passionate about, is the problem of uh, But if we will limit the import and export of vehicles, it's also not proper. So, uh, Kong Paul came up with this bill, which is accepted by, and it's hailed by a lot of the vintage car clubs in the Philippines and also the Manila Sports Car Club, because it will also pave the way and make it easy for the enthusiasts to bring in really beautiful vintage cars that the general public can also appreciate. That's why we are really banking on your help, Chairman, that we can fast track this and have it approved before the election campaign period starts.
Thank you, Kong Pineda. And we will do our best. The committee will do our best to hopefully come up with a committee report to be sponsored on Monday. Hopefully pass it next week and on third reading the week before the break, so we can try to reconcile the House and Senate versions and pass it before, at least approve and ratify it before the campaign season. So
Thank you.
you have
Mr.
my
Chairman,
commitment.
I was listening to your discussion a while ago, and I think your main concern really is what constitutes a vintage car in terms of age. Am I correct, Paul?
That is correct, Kong. That's correct.
Yes. I say it's different from country to country. As what Congressman Das explained, that in some countries they would consider 25 years as vintage. In other countries, 25 years would be considered as classic. In other countries, it would be considered that 50 is vintage. So with that, the committee arrived at a middle ground, and we looked at 30 years. But that is still subject for discussion. We look at 30 years and older to be allowed importation to our country by a private individual. So this is something that there is no standard in terms of what is considered as vintage, but that's the reason why we just came up with 30 years, because we felt that's the middle ground between, let's say, 25 and 50. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Since you brought up a very important topic, which is importation, may we, is the gentleman from the Bureau of Customs here, I'm sorry, it's Attorney Karen, ma'am, Karen Yambao. We'd like to ask the Bureau of Customs of course, their comments, because definitely a lot of us would like to import, and I had the same problem when I imported my Porsche that I mentioned, na 356 na lumang-luma na, and we had a difficult time. The Bureau of Customs did not know how to valuate it. And at that time, I'll tell you the truth, we got it for $30,000 in the US. That was about in the 90s. That was in 97. So mura pa yung 356 noon. So it was about $36,000 that I got it from the US. And then when we brought it in here, they were going to charge me the same rates that was being brought in by the brand new Porsche, which would have cost me double higher than the car. The value of much higher than the value of the actual car. So sabi ko parang nagkakaproblema talaga if you're going to import. Is that correct, Ma'am Karen? There is a problem distinguishing the blue book or the value of a vehicle, particularly if it's 40 to 50 years old? Attorney Karen? Or do you have a
Hello.
system in place for vehicles like that?
No, you see, when it comes to valuation of importation, there's a method that is provided by the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act. So it's the first one that's used is the transaction value. So it's provided by law, so it's not really that flexible. But I think when you can appeal it if you can
So that's why we're
provide.
writing the law, Attorney Karen. No? That's why we're doing this law, to be able to come up with the clearer guidelines, on particularly on these vehicles lang. I understand the point of the Bureau of Customs na ayaw natin magkaroon ng smuggling of cars, because you don't want to bring it in as vintage, but actually it's a usable sports car that's 30 years old. For example, a 30-year-old sports car that's only 30 years, 1990s. Magandang Ferrari pa yan, usable or whatever. Obviously, we don't want to circumvent the law on the blue book value of these vehicles. But I think the point of this measure are, if you bring in a very old vintage car, yung problema kasi is the blue book, yung transactional value. So what you're saying is how much it was bought abroad, yan ipapakita nyo sa BOC. The problem is, when you buy it at a certain price, sometimes the members of the Bureau of Customs do not agree to that price. There's the valuation, and then nagkakagulo sa valuation. So right now, what you're saying is it's the transaction that's under the law.
Yes po.
Okay, so if you, for example, we buy an old Mustang, it's a 10,000, maybe even less dollar car, they will tax you on the amount that was purchased in the US at less than $10,000, for example. That will be the taxable amount.
Yes po, but there are other factors. Sometimes it's the import. It's really the import assessment service that what do you call this? That recommends the value. So kasi syempre po kailangan po nating i-check, 'di ba po,
Yes.
yung value. Like the declarant can easily say that it was $10,000, and you can easily produce an invoice which provides for that. But then there's also a check that we need to do, and it's the import assessment service of the Bureau of Customs that does that.
Okay.
Yun.
Well, definitely, if you're bringing in, for example, an Aston Martin or an old, for example, Jaguar and XKE or whatever, definitely mas mahal yun if you look at the value of that. But it's very subjective kasi it depends on the year, the way it was restored, and things like that. But anyway, this law or this proposal would like to try to streamline, no? Or try to help the Bureau of Customs on how to come up with evaluation, possibly. Di ba, Paul? Pwede natin pag-usapan yan, Congressman Paul, no? On evaluation to this
Yeah,
law? Or
Sen-
did you leave it out?
we initially had a provision on that, Senator Miggs. That would clarify it, but there were certain concerns from the Department of Finance. Just so we took it out just to make the bill less contentious, because there are already existing procedures on the issue that you're discussing, and essentially they have three different sources that they use. The Kelly, I forgot the two other ones. They already have books on this for older cars. So what we did is we just left it out. They took out the provision, and just whatever's there they're using, we just we'll let it be. The major difference will be is you can now bring in a car and you don't have to be a balikbayan. And then as is the valuation and the taxes.
So we have to make sure under this bill, we can bring in the car. You don't have to be a balikbayan. That's number one.
Yes.
And number two, we also remove the ban on older cars, because I remember there was a ban on older cars to avoid the similar situation what happened when all these eco zones were bringing in all these old Starex, all these old right-hand drive cars converted and sold for a while. And that was one of the reasons I had a hard time also bringing in the car that I brought in, was because there was that ban in the late 90s to the early 2000s on these vehicles to avoid the second-hand proliferation of second-hand cars being imported cheaply from Japan and Korea. So definitely, we under this law, we will be allowed to import our vintage cars.
Yes, 30 years and older, and the way it's written now. So that it clarifies that issue, Senator Mig.
Yes.
So basta lang 30 years and older, and it's a rolling the way it's worded. It's so in 2030 you can bring in 1999 below. It's a rolling date, and that's the way that the car clubs, the enthusiasts, and the experts had recommended to make it easier also to apply and interpret. So it addresses your concern, Senator. I think, except as I mentioned earlier, uh, we can always put a you can always put a provision on valuation. We had a provision on that, but again, as I mentioned, DOF had certain concerns, so we just took it out just to simplify the bill, because we can always do that in the next Congress.
Thank you very much. Paul. Maybe we can ask now our car enthusiasts before we go back to government. Well, we have the Automotive Association of the Philippines here with us. We have the president, Sir Gus Feria. Also with him are Mr. Ricardo Guevara and Mr. Gus Lagman. So, who amongst the gentlemen would like to be recognized? I guess the president, Sir Joe.
Yes, yes, Your Honor. Most of the things are being discussed already here, so we won't add more to that. But there's one item that I'd like to put a little bit stress on. I was very much interested in the social impact of these small car repair shops that could produce parts. While we say we want to promote them, I think when I speak to other people from other countries, we cannot be an industrial center because of volume. However, we can be a center of excellence. So if you build an industry on these vintage parts that can be manufactured here in this country and eventually exported, it will have an impact on the, in among people who are doing small business repairing, parts. As you know, as you experience, looking for vintage parts is something next to impossible. So sometimes you have to resort to somebody manufacturing it for you. That can be something that can impact us here for small businessmen that can do that. However, there's no incentive. Like, for example, what can government do when they want to export these things? If we develop that sector of, the industry, can they export with incentives from government? These are vintage parts. We're
Yeah,
talking
thank
about
you, Mr.
vintage
Joe.
parts.
Actually, I recall there is a company here in the Philippines. For example, I think the name was, I had my staff just check now, MD1 Corporation, and they make spare parts for wheelies Jeeps and vintage Jeeps for all over the world. It's exported actually. I remember reading about it. I had my staff just research now.
Yeah.
It's for the World War II parts. So many of the restored Jeeps from the US, the parts actually come from the Philippines. It's exported out from here. So it's a good industry actually, if we can do
Yeah.
that. And not only can we of course restore the cars here and export it again later on, but also as you said, we can create the parts here and export the parts to other
Yes.
places in the world. I think they do that also in Taiwan, because I know there's a lot of Ford Mustang parts that are actually made in Taiwan, exported all over the world. And we can use this law to jumpstart a new industry.
New industry. So it would have a social dimension rather than focusing only on collectors and restorers.
Correct. I absolutely agree. And maybe we can ask our other colleagues that are here. Do we have anyone from the vintage classic car clubs that are here with us? Uh, please, acknowledge yourself. Do we have anyone from the Makati Sports Car Club?
I'm with the Manila Sports Car Club, Senator.
Hi, sir. Yes, Sir Andres, you're recognized. Would you like to share with us your experiences and how would you like to improve this measure?
I think the measure as written now is, I have no further comments on it. There was a vintage car club that was active, but unfortunately it died away, maybe because of the difficulties of maintaining a vintage car here. The Manila Sports Car Club was founded in 1967. And when it started out, the cars then that it had weren't vintage, but they're vintage now. So the Manila Sports Car Club probably has one of the largest collections of very well maintained vintage cars. I think one thing that hasn't been stressed is that the bill, as written, requires that the vintage car be kept authentic. In other words, you can't bring in a car and then put in a surplus diesel engine in. It has to be authentic, which is consistent with the purpose of the law, which is to preserve the historicity of the vehicle. So I think that also prevents people from bringing it in just so that they don't have to buy a new car. And also, no one will bring in a 30-year-old car under with these requirements, just as a substitute for a car that they can already buy here very easily. Those are my only comments, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Santa Maria, and we appreciate your comments. And yes, the Manila Sports Car Club is one of the premier, or the premier club when it comes to vintage cars. I've seen your displays sometimes at Manila Polo Club or times published in the magazines and newspapers. And you guys have a wonderful collection and a sight to see for everyone. Maybe we can also ask. Yes, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, may I might just add, and I'd like to add to the comment, your comment as well. I have a 1948 MGTC, and when I wanted to replace the brake drums with the authentic replacement aluminum version, I had to order it from the United States. And when it arrived, as with your experience, it was made in Taiwan. Now, these are boutique industries. The volumes are not large because there are not so many of these vintage cars around. And this is something that I think the Philippines is eminently suited for. Don Bosco has wonderful engineers that they turn out. And this is something that we can develop. We don't have to compete with the big production firms outside, but rather concentrate on these small volume, possibly high markup items. So this is very encouraging, Mr. Senator. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think Congressman Paul, so that we can make it easier for the enthusiast, maybe we can include a provision, maybe we can reintroduce a provision to help on the import and export of this equipment. I don't think we should have a problem. This is such a small industry for the Department of Finance to worry about, but it's a good industry to jumpstart as many of these small possible manufacturers. As I mentioned, MD1 Corporation that are building parts here and sending abroad. So maybe we can revisit that provision. Kong Paul, I'll talk to you after this hearing, and maybe we can have a technical working group between your staff and my staff so we can discuss that, because a big component of collecting vintage cars really is repairing the car. I think all of us who have vintage cars know for a fact that it's probably 70% under repair and 30% in pure enjoyment. And during that 70% under repair, we are always in constant lookout for the parts, and definitely most of the parts are imported. So may kahirapan, especially if you send it through DHL, FedEx. When it comes here, customs really does not know how to evaluate these old parts that you're bringing in to repair your cars. Nagkakaroon ng confusion. So I think we can clarify it or come up with a policy with this measure to help everybody to this effect. Maybe, thank you very much, Mr. Santa Maria. Maybe we can talk to Top Gear. I'm a fan of Top Gear. I used to get Top Gear a lot when we used to have it not just online, but through hard copy. Sir Dinzo, you're recognized, sir. You have any comments on the measure?
Thank you for inviting us, Senator Migs. It's my first Senate hearing, and it's very fascinating. And it's um, we're we're an enthusiast website, and we support measures that will help propagate vintage cars and all sorts of. And I read all the memos you guys sent, and I agree it enriches our culture. And I think most of the speakers are right. We have a long way to go. Other countries have good legal frameworks, and I think we've all taken notes on how other countries have done vintage car registration and accreditation, and um, and it's already reaching the point where I don't know what the law will look like when electrification comes in, because some countries they're changing the engines to electric motors already. But they're old cars. They're 40-year-old classic cars, but they're changing the powertrains, and maybe we can make provisions to already be ready rather than make a whole new set of laws when these classic cars start becoming electrified. But um, we're also here to chronicle, so we're glad to see this bill moving forward. And um, they say this is like the last gasp of gasoline engines, and we want to see it preserved. And thank you for doing this, and we're glad to see this bill moving forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ginzo. Maraming salamat for attending this hearing. And as a fan of Top Gear, I appreciate the support you're giving to this measure.
Thank you,
We'd
sir.
also like to hear, thank you, sir. We'd also like to hear from the Coalition of Clean Air Advocates, Tito Alex. Good to see you, Tito. I call him Tito because his son is a good friend of mine. Sir, you'd like to comment because I know you're an advocate of clean air, but we appeal to the clean air advocates na ilan lang naman to. Maybe this is just a 0.5% of the cars running, not even probably less than 0.5% of the cars running. Would you like to weigh in on the discussion, sir? You're on your mute, sir. You're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute. Tito Alex, I can't hear you. You're on mute, sir. I think you're still on mute. Is it me or okay, let's see. I think it's you, sir. I don't think we can.
Yeah, we can't hear. Paki-unmute po. Paki-unmute.
I think your mic is not working, Tito Alex, because you're unmuted, but your mic, would you be able to we'll wait for you. Maybe you can ask yours. Yeah, we can continue the discussion and get back to you. Maybe you can change a mobile device. We'll come back to you, Tito Alex. Don't worry. That's a commitment. So at least you can change your mobile device. Your mic's not working. We have also who would like to weigh in on the issue. We have with us Dr. George Estera. Sir, would you like to comment, sir?
Good evening. Yes, I'm also with the Manila Sports Car Club. Well, thank you, Congressman Paul. From just coffee table discussion years ago, it looks like it's full steam ahead with this proposal, and a lot of people are very, very, very happy. And it's true that many industries, small industries, will be benefited. I think most of the points that I've written here have been taken in. MD1, I know there's a guy that made a copy of 9/11 years ago and was sued by Porsche, of course. And I'd also like to maybe share. There are some countries in South America making Bugattis, old Bugattis, and they've been featured. And also, it has been mentioned about the electrification. Yes, I think I'm now in the other side of the pond, and even GM is now selling electric motors. GM itself. Uh, Everybody knows Summit. Everybody knows those companies selling parts for V8s and everything. But now GM is selling the motors itself. And then there's a whole large industry of those guys in the recycling, selling the batteries from broken down Teslas. So I think that's true that we have to find a way how to incorporate that coming wave, and it's a big wave. There's EV West in LA making fantastic regular Beetles, but all electric. Combis, all electric. 911s, all electric. So bug eyes, all electric. So that's just it. It's just I'm just so hyped up. And thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Sir George. Maraming salamat po.
Yeah.
Gabi na pala po sa inyo dyan. It's
Well,
not time.
I just got stuck because of this crazy, sabi nga ni Tatang, PU na Omicron.
Tama. So, thank you very much for your inputs. Yes, this will move
Yeah.
forward. We'll support this to move forward for the industry.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And let's go back to government before we recognize once again the NGOs. We have with us from the Department of Budget and Management, Mr. Mark James Evangelista with the DLLO. Mark, are you there? Any comment from the DBM? I don't think naman there should be any comments from the DBM because we're not asking budget from the national agency, but I think this is on the part of the importation, but he's not around, so we move forward. We have with us the officer in charge, and I think this is quite important because this is many of these cars are historic in nature. They have history, they have culture. There are some restored cars, for example, there's some unrestored cars, rather, for example, in Negros Occidental, where my father is from. And many of them were owned by like governor of Negros 60 years ago, the mayor of the city of Bacolod, for example, 50 years ago. It was the official car of the provincial government and all. Ang maraming ganun sa Negros. And even Negros Oriental, maraming mistiso dun sa Bais and all these areas where they've had nice vintage cars. And which comes into play on the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. May we recognize Mr. Alvin Alcid, sir, to
Sure.
comment and weigh in on this measure.
Thank you, Mr. Senator, Mr. Chair. Good morning po. On the part of the National Historical Commission, we interpose no objection to the proposed bills. In fact, we appreciate very much the inclusion of Section 7 with regards to the exportation, as the good chair has been mentioning, where the NHEP will be consulted, especially in the exportation of vintage vehicles which have historical value to the country. As you know po, I don't know if you're aware, the NHEP manages one museum which is known as the Presidential Car Museum, where, of course, as the name itself, we have collections of the presidential cars. So we really appreciate if we could at least protect in exporting our vintage cars which have historical and cultural value to the history of the country. I would like to also second the comment of Congressman Daza earlier that it might open yung business for vintage cars restorers. Mr. Chair, before we opened the museum, we had to restore these cars, and we were having a hard time because government, you have to find those that are PILGES registered, and Very few po ang meron. In fact, wala po. So we had to negotiate and ask the restorer na mag-register ka muna sa PhilJeps kasi we have to follow government regulations. So in essence, Mr. Chair, we support this bill and we appreciate that NHCP or we have to at least protect from exporting yung mga historical cars that have historical and cultural value to our country. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alcid. You know, I, I actually commensurate with you with what could have happened to you guys, and imagine you're in charge of the upkeep of these presidential vehicles, which are historical to the country. No, I think you have as early as Quezon, di ba? Kay Manuel Quezon, meron kayo at all the way to
The car of President Aguinaldo, although he did not use it when he was the president, pero we have his car on display in the presidential car.
And
It's a
trying to keep
1924
that.
car.
Oo nga, trying to have the upkeep of those cars may be a real pain in the
Yes.
neck for you guys, particularly if there's no one that you can get legally or through government regulation to be able to restore them. Yeah,
In fact, cosmetic lang yung restoration, mahirap na eh. How much more if you want to make it run? So, yun po.
yes. And the reason why I say this is very important is because I had a chance to go to Taiwan couple of years ago, before the pandemic, and I went to the Chiang Kai-shek shrine, you know, the big museum, and there is a car from the Philippines there, donated by the Filipino-Chinese community in 1955 to Chiang Kai-shek. It was from the Philippines, bulletproof. I think it was a bulletproof car, a Cadillac, and it's there. And it really says it was a gift from the Philippines, Filipino-Chinese, I guess, chamber at that time. No, so when I saw that, I was very proud. 1955, tayo pa nagpadala ng bulletproof car kay Chiang Kai-shek to protect him from whatever opponents he had at the time. So yeah, so this has historical value. You know, a lot of these cars have historical value. They come from a good lineage, and we're happy to have you on board with this measure, sir.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Eric po.
Hi, Kong Eric. Yes, Kong.
Yes, I'd just like to inquire from Mr. Alcid if they also have the car of President Kirin already in their possession.
Yes, Sir Congressman Pineda, yes, we have it on display at the Presidential Car Museum. It was originally in Vigan. Yes, sir. It's now there.
I noted in the 80s when I was going around the Philippines looking for old cars, I was fortunate enough to see the Quirino car at the University of the Northeastern Philippines. It's an old Cadillac limousine. It even has the plate number. I forgot what it connotes. Do you have that?
Yes, sir. It's on display at the Presidential Car Museum. We have it on loan from the family. So
That's
yeah,
good. It's very good to hear.
Yes, sir. I hope you can visit. Although the pandemic doesn't allow us to go around much, but if you have the time, please visit the museum.
Sir Alvin, saan yun? Saan yung museum ninyo? I would love to see that one day.
Yes, sir. It's within the Quezon Memorial Circle. That's very near the Quezon, within the area. That's where we were able to have a lot given to us, loaned to us by the
Very near Congress.
Very near you guys, Eric.
It's just there, within your
Sino
very...
tayo dyan? Dapat required viewing yan sa ating tatlo ni Paul. Ni Kong Paul.
Can you give us the exact address, Mr. Alcid?
Sir, it's just within the Quezon Memorial Circle. I don't have the exact address. It's just elliptical road. You just have to go there.
Is there a landmark?
I can sense.
Are you on the side of Quezon City Hall, or you have to drive further out where the restaurants are?
It's very near the restaurants, Mr. Chair. I think it's
inside.
It is inside. It's inside.
Okay.
Circle, Mr. Chair. Sir Congressman Pineda, it's inside the circle.
Okay, that's good to hear. Because I always thought that the presidential cars were displayed at the Intramuros.
That was before, a long time ago, sir. In the 80s, it was displayed. I think 70s as well. No? it was not really on display. It was just placed there. It was out of context. It's Intramuros is
We're
Spanish.
looking at pictures on your website. Maganda. That's why I want to visit. I'll bring my kids
Okay,
when
sir.
it's not as the
Yes, sir.
surge is not as high.
I'll just let us know, sir, through your secretary. We'll have a special tour for you guys.
Thank you, Alvin. I really appreciate that. That will be a treat for me. And moving forward to the other agencies, we also have with us Bureau of Philippine Standards, the DTI, and because definitely when it comes to importation, the DTI also weighs in. Do we have them with us today? Director Neil Katahay. Director, you're recognized if you're on board. Na si Director. So moving forward, well, we have also with us from the TESDA, Miss Beverly Bionisto is here. The reason why we invited TESDA is because we can have a training program for, right now they have a program for mechanics, I believe. This is engine repairs and all that. Maybe we can have a special program for vintage cars. That would be wonderful because then that will really open an industry up to the restoration, exportation of these vehicles. Ma'am Beverly, you're recognized. Could you give your comments on the measure, ma'am?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. May I be recognized? This is Babes Andrade po.
Sorry, you're representing
TESDA po.
TESDA. Yes, ma'am,
Opo,
Babes.
I am
Please go
from
ahead.
Opo. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the committee and all present here this morning po. Relative po dun sa nabanggit mo, Mr. Chair, in general, the agency supports the overall objective of these measures po, is specifically on the provisions of the vintage vehicle restoration education. So, the agency supports po in terms of skills development based on the demands of the vintage car restoration industry. So the industry can coordinate with us po on the skills development and the skills prioritization as may be identified by the boards. That would be all, Mr. Chair, and we will submit our official position on this bills po. Thank you po, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Babes. Actually, kung naipasa na natin itong panukalang ito, I'm looking at possibly putting additional funding to TESDA for particularly this training for particularly this industry. I know TESDA cannot motu proprio just come out with programs on its own. So maybe me and Paul can spearhead this. I can use this for the next budget, 2023 budget. We can put a bit of funding to help TESDA train possible future vintage car mechanics and restorers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that note, Mr. Chair, may I also emphasize, since wala nga po tayong experts ngayon on the vintage, because most probably the existing training regulations in terms of automotive industry, iba po siguro itong para sa vintage as you are discussing. So yung mga experts po natin, in order to train our trainers here, we really need the support on this matter po.
O kasi mga lumang engines na to eh. This is
Opo.
completely different from the new engines that we see now. These are carbureted engines that 40, 50 years old. But we have the best skilled workers. I know this for a fact because yung sa classic speed cars sa Clark, I remember when I spoke to Angie King, we were discussing it before, and she said that we had one of the best restorers here because they're so talented. They're so talented. Thank you very much, Mama. Maybe recognize if we can get back Mr. Loinas, sir.
Are you talking of Alex Loinas?
Yes, Mr. Loinas, Mr. Alex Loinas. But for the meantime, while we're waiting, may I just ask for a 5-minute suspension?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please, Mr. Santa Maria, you go ahead.
Yes, I think Alex is having a hard time logging back in, but we did manage to speak And he says he supports the bill completely.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
let me just.
Thank you
All right.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. Senator.
That's great. Anyone else would like to comment on the measure before we proceed with the technical working group? Sir Alex, Tito Alex, we got your message from Mr. Attorney Santa Maria. And we'd like to recognize, we also have with us from Car Guide Philippines, Mr. Ang, Mr. Ulysses Ang. Is he on board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm on board. As my colleague Dean Sir from Top Gear said, we fully support this bill. I think it's about time that the Philippines would have a classic car bill on its own, or vintage car bill on its own, and we look forward to seeing this be passed into law.
Thank you, Ulysses. And yes, this would be a great step forward for the classic car industry. So, anyone else would like to weigh in on the issue? It's it's a fairly simple bill. It will only affect, and I know the LTO could be worried about possible palusot no ng mga tao. So we'll make sure that wala masyadong palusot ASEC Galvante. And I just know the I guess the feeling of the LTO is that people will circumvent the law by registering their cars as vintage cars. So what we can do, ASEC, is, and I agree with you, we need to look at, revisit the age of the vehicle. So baka kailangan mas matanda ng konti. May bit longer period of time to be considered a classic car. And we've discussed this already with Congressman Paul, and the House is open to an idea of increasing the age of the classic car. And but let's look at other provisions, Congressman Paul. Let's revisit some of the provisions. For example, on the weekend use, maybe that would limit a lot of the owners now. Maybe we can come up with another wording through our technical working group, wherein we encapsulate what the LTO wants, no, not to abuse these older cars, but not classic cars, not vintage cars, running on the road, which will not comply with the law. So that's what we have to find out. Is that the sweet spot on how we can keep the vintage cars and classic cars registered and running, but not necessarily be misused by certain individuals who would like to use their old cars by not complying with other provisions of other laws. So that is what we're going to be discussing with the technical working group. But overall, I believe that we really need this measure, and I think it is a measure that is a long time coming, and I think will help a lot of our vintage car owners. We have Mr. Guevara on the line. Would you like to give a comment, sir? You're on mute, po. You're on mute.
Senator Migs, yeah, I'm representing Automobile Association of the Philippines together with our president Joe Ferreria and Trustee Gas Lagman. So we are supporting this this bill for as long as I believe it's written that you can only use the vehicle for weekends or really for leisure, not for business or public transportation. So this also prevents abuse of the law, and we fully support it, Senator.
Thank you very much, Sir Ricky. And I believe there are no other members who wish to, and resource persons who wish to comment. I so move that we proceed to the technical working group to come up with a committee report as soon as possible time. Hopefully by Monday, I can report this out to the Senate for possible second reading, the latest Wednesday next week. It's a very non-controversial bill. I don't think a lot of violent reactions will be made out of this measure. As a matter of fact, it will help us clarify a lot of issues, particularly for vintage car owners. At the same time, opening up possible avenues for new industries. As I mentioned, as we mentioned earlier, the production of car parts here being exported abroad for what they're doing in Taiwan now and many other countries. And also possible making the Philippines a possible hub for restoration of classic cars around the world. They can import it here, restore it, and then bring it back to the US. There's a big market for that. And I think now with this policy, alam na po nila yung pwedeng gawin at may polisiya na po tayo. Hindi katulad noon, nung pinasok ko po yung classic car, ay hindi po nila, unang-una, ayaw po nilang ipapasok dahil may ban daw sa mga lumang kotse. Pangalawa, hindi nila alam paano i-evaluate. They didn't know how to evaluate the car and how to treat it as a luxury car, as a they didn't really know how to treat it. There was a big confusion there and open to a lot of illegal transactions. So we want to avoid that completely. And I thank everyone here today, particularly my colleagues, Senator Tolentino, Congressman Paul Daza, Congressman Eric Pineda, the authors of the House, as well as all the resource persons that are here from the government and private sector to assist us in this measure. So once again, maraming salamat po. Particularly also Asek Galvante, thank you very much, sir, for your time. You're here with us since the very beginning. I know you've been wanting to help me on this. As I said, every time magkita po kami ni Asek, whether it is the budget hearing or other topics, I always remind him, sir, tulungan mo naman kami sa classic cars and vintage cars. And he said he's been very helpful, as a matter of fact. So, but he's asking us to come up with a LONGA to be able to come up with the proper guidelines on this measure, on this particular industry. So sa inyo lahat, maraming salamat po. May God bless you all. Please stay safe and healthy. And this hearing on the subcommittee on vintage cars is hereby adjourned. Maraming salamat po. Pleasant good morning.
Yes, sir. Thank you.